chance to look around. Obviously, if you haven't, do have a wander afterwards. So we just thought I'd come in and just give a bit of background, context to the paintings, and then obviously you can ask questions of me if you like. I've got this sort of set up here, which is more a gesture towards looking like I'm working this morning. There's some little bits here which I'll talk through as we go along. There's quite a backdrop to this show, and this work, because it's effectively 3 years worth of work. So it's quite a journey which Mary and I have both been on really since we went down to Cornwall, which was initially for a stay at a friend's house, and then we were so engaged with this particular place where we were staying, really from the outset, we decided to go back down there to this same location, and the second time we went down was to stay in a place called Tregardock farm, which is really, well, it's a sheep farm, and we were staying in this hut. I was staying in this hut, which was on stilts, overlooking the sea. It was an incredible place, and I was only there initially for 3 days, but I was drawing every day. It was complete immersal in stuff and very stripped back, and kind of different things which I like and which helped my kind of getting engaged with this space. Because of that stay, I then took Mary back, so it was a bit risky because it was very, very basic. But we ended up staying more than a week, and we stayed for a month, and there was this kind of growing sort of association we had with this place and the people who were meeting down there. We've both been living in Oxford, and I've been doing drawings of buildings for the last probably 15 years. Black and white mainly, and focusing on classical buildings, so Oxford, Bath and London, sort of key places. And I've always kind of tended towards going towards very like specific places and drawing them over and over and getting a kind of familiarity with a particular spot. And I guess that's really just been because it takes me such a long time to feel I'm doing anything kind of service, if you like. So you start off with working in a certain way, and then even after 2 weeks, you're probably, well, I find I'm looking back at work from 2 weeks ago and seeing it's, moved on somewhat. And then so you'll kind of, if you take that on and on and on, it becomes quite an interesting journey. And actually, you can sometimes look back after 2 years and think, oh, that piece right at the start was kind of doing something, and what was that about? So it certainly doesn't have a linear thing with the work improving, but it does definitely, in terms of that sort of well, if you like, of where the work's coming from, it definitely builds and becomes much more satisfying, like a sort of integrity really to what you're working on. So yeah, I was sort of so the whole all this body of work, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a whole new phase for me. It's all experimental work. It's all done outside. I sort of touch pieces up in the studio, but the majority of it is either on the cliff, walking down to the cliff, or on the beach. And I think the fact that it was all experimental in my head was very much thinking, I'm just going to, so no agendas here, I'm just going to kind of throw myself into it and roll with it. I'm sort of past, I guess in my head I'm saying I'm past caring really, past caring about is anyone going to like it, or is it going to look right in this particular place, or blah blah blah. So that was on that level, the work's been a kind of liberation for me, and I think I needed that, partly because I'd sort of been doing a certain style of work for quite a while, and that, although I was always experimenting within that, it wasn't quite something was petering out for me. I think if Mary knows, I tend to say things sometimes quite dramatically, but I think in reality I was sort of thinking I need to do something different here, otherwise I'll just kind of dry up, and that will be that's the end of that. I'll get a job in the bar or something. So Mary and I basically, but Mary's really was steering this. We decided to go down to Cornwall. We had an offer from this couple to stay in the house for 7 months through the winter, which we at the time thought was pretty ridiculous because our lives were in Oxford and that. But intuitively, we thought, no, there's something in this, so we kind of followed our intuition really, and that was quite painful initially because it was stressful. We had to work out different practicalities like how we're going to live and renting our place out and various things like this, but we decided to go with it, and then it all unfolded from there. We were staying in this house quite close to Tregardock Beach. Various things were just quite hilarious in a way for me creatively, because we'd wake up in the house and then you looked straight out the window down to the sea. So it was just like, oh, there's my subject matter. I'm effectively working from just waking up. Of course, this is not work because it's just appreciating the environment, but living in it was just really very cool. From then finding that I could very naturally then do my thing, or just kind of start engaging with it, with materials. If that sounds all quite romantic in some respects, it wasn't. We also, we were there over the winter months. So the house was wind howling round. It's quite severe at times. If we were going to have an argument there, I would have a big old argument, because I think it's just the nature of the place. You get this with the Cornish. It's all kind of out there. There's a fieriness and an expressiveness about people, and in the winter it's really interesting from that point of view, listening to people's stories. So we had to. So yes, we were loving it, but it was also like, are we gonna cope? There was that sort of in the background, and yeah, we're here. So so in terms of, is everyone with me? All right? Yeah. Okay. In terms of the process of working, I had this big thing that is a bit mad, but was just to go down to Tregardock and kind of kneel in the mud, which is just, one of those strange things. I just wanted to kind of sort of humble myself really, but then not. It was like lots of different things which were on reflection about just connecting with the land, with the place, kind of feeling, I don't know, alive. I think, you could get someone could express that much better than me. But it was really powerful instinct, and I guess symbolically, kneeling in the mud is what it is. It's kind of just kind of whatever. We're quite primeval, really. And what was I guess quite interesting on that front. First of all, the environment is like primordial. It's like almost you can, these huge monolithic rocks. You wonder, you wander in and out of them, and it's quite an alien sort of environment, and it's very stripped back. The granite is so robust and strong. And it was actually the granite cliffs, which when you go around, you can see on the video that Paul who's here, has done a great video of some of it's me working, but there's also a lot of shots just of the sea and the beach, and you see it's it's a very dramatic and unique sort of place. And seeing the cliffs and seeing them silhouetted against the sunlight in the evenings was actually what sort of made me think, I think I could take what I was doing with the buildings to this place. So that felt that was what was joining up in my rational path, if you like. But then in reality, the actual work that transpired was nothing to do with the black granite. Really, it took on all different a whole different process which I hadn't had. Yeah, as I say, it just sort of was something I was following and developed. So I'll show you a couple of pieces just to sort of explain some of this process of development. Okay. Just generally pastel sketches on paper. Now, I normally, over time, I've always attempted to work big, but because getting down to Tregardock was so it's pretty inaccessible, and you've got all your stuff. And as you can see, I'm stumbling while I do this. When I'm out working, I'm kind of stumbling around and hitting things. So I carry a couple of boxes and full of materials, and started doing just these small studies. And then that thing again of intuition. So I just felt that as I was going down through the landscape, I needed to, or I wanted to, quite impulsively just capture those things which I saw as I went along. So, which is not unusual as an artist working in that way. I guess the bit that was more unusual was I sort of did it no matter what, which was, so sometimes I didn't have the right materials or the right paper, it's all that kind of control aspect of working out what you're doing before you go and do it, having the right paint. It wasn't really working like that. It was what I was finding by actually just going out each day, observing things, and sometimes walking from the house, which was about a mile away. I wouldn't actually get down to the beach. It's like, oh, this is a bit ridiculous. I've come down here. I thought all I was going to be drawing was a beach, but I'd spent weeks drawing hedgerows, and then I get caught up in quite specific things. I mean, the gorse is a very obvious thing to get caught up in down there. I think the process of just focusing in on one specific thing and recording it always went somewhere for me. So even if the piece was not really that recognisable or done in a bit of charred wood or something, so sometimes I did, because I didn't always have the right materials, I would, for example, use mud, or I'd always have a pencil and a pastel, a piece of charcoal perhaps, and some paper, but I would tend to use, I started to sort of, partly through default, use things in the landscape. So it wasn't, that again wasn't really any particular agenda, and it didn't always work, but I sort of found, it sounds a bit naff, but the sort of nature providing kind of thing did actually happen. You sort of, I think when you're working out in it and it's raining and you're in the elements, you're really not worried if some mud or some sand gets into the work. It sort of becomes part of what you're doing. So as Mary mentioned, you had to go down to the beach, and I'd various levels of things to learn about the botany of plants, learning how the landscape changes with the seasons, and then learning about the tides. There's the elements, all the the fronts coming in from the sea. This was all quite problematic in a way, and I would often be down by the beach. I'd do 2 or 3 of these small sketches, and then you see this rain front approaching. So I'd have to sort of either leg it back up the hill, put my materials under a rock, or if I was on the beach, go in a cave or something until it passed. So you sort of, I don't know, it was interesting. I sort of felt for each time that I was kind of the downpour got me or washed the work away. In fact, these were kind of cool. This was kind of cool because it was part of this process. It was all fine. Although also when you lose work in the rain, obviously it's not fine. But and you get back with just a drenched piece of paper. So a couple of other things to mention. One was just this attachment to the land. One was I started using spring water. There was this little spring that came out just above the cliffs, and I started using that for my drawings, like in the sort of setback from the beach. And I just started really enjoying that in a sort of disproportionate way. It's just some natural water. But I enjoyed this process, and then started specifically using seawater in the work on the beach. So there was this, I was sort of cultivating this whole thing of, again, not really consciously, but using a much wider mediums than I had done before, and it was sort of, that's also making it all more complex. So there was all these things, anyway, that were sort of part of this process. I guess that's what kept me interested in it all, because there was lots going on. And then over much longer time, as my medium, different materials were changing. I was using oils, like in this one. I got into using wax a lot, and that's been quite significant for me. I'd burn the wax onto the board as a sort of starting process, and it was a sort of like, I don't know, sort of a ritual in some ways. A sort of it kind of got me engaged in the piece, and then went on from there really, and then obviously has textures and a rusticity which I kind of like in the work. And I had this sort of notion actually with that if I'm doing the work and I was to sort of toss it into the landscape, that it would just sort of sit there and look kind of, wouldn't look too awful in the landscape, so it'd be sort of part of it, So by melting the wax and putting matches in and burning things, it's sort of the whole elemental thing of the place. It sort of seemed to make some sort of sense for me.
And were those ideas that are coming to you sort of spontaneously as you went?
Yeah, pretty much. I think a lot of the time I was kind of doing things and not really knowing why, and then coming and then analysing it perhaps much later, and trying to work out what it was all about. And obviously these things always have a reason, don't they? Another sort of aspect of working which was significant for me was was that when you're spending a long time sort of in this sort of environment, it took quite a long time, but after a few months, maybe a year, I felt this kind of charge going on in me, you know, just in my body, which was sort of building, if you like, and when it was going into the work, just a kind of energy. And well, Mary had a book by Barbara Hepworth, which I've also been looking at alongside other things about, you know, that we all have read about nature and its kind of, well, like Manley Hopkins, he says about this charge, doesn't he, in nature, but I hadn't really thought too much about, well, how that charge then, as people, we obviously, in that environment, like nature, will have a kind of charge within us, or whatever you want to call that. But Barbara Hepworth is like particularly interesting, I think, and she like writes amazingly about this kind of physicality and about the work that she produced, which had like monumental physical process. And she, you know, she says how she rarely draws what she does. I rarely draw what I see. I draw what I feel in my body. Which I think is a sort of is interesting in terms of grasping her work. But she would kind of, you know, when she was a kid travelling through the landscape, she would see the contours of the land, and they had a kind of visual memory. But then she also took them kind of into her body, and she used the stone because, as she says, the stone had a kind of it was the only thing that was going to do this justice, you know, to what she was trying to convey. And I resonated with that a lot. I think because I sort of, with my own work, I had this. So I've got this. You have all these brushes. Artists would say this late, but you have all these brushes, and then you end up using 2 or 3 all the time. But this brush I've sort of worn down on one side, as you can see, and I had this kind of way of painting which I think is ongoing, but I'm sort of hitting the board quite heavily and abruptly with like thick oil paint and kind of swathing it on the beach, and it just felt really good to be kind of doing this, and I think that was just, I'd never worked like that before, so I think it was just, well, this is the environment, you know, it's the environment that you're in, and it's going to affect you and sort of change the way you do things.
So do you think these are more like emotional feeling pictures than visuals?
So
those are your reactions to what you were seeing at the time, rather than trying to copy what you saw?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a move from sort of a more detailed, like over in the corner there, that's a fairly early piece. I mean, it's very much about mark making as well. But in more recent times, there has been a move from sort of what I'm seeing to what I'm feeling. Yeah.
And did you use like natural earth or dust rock, whatever, in the painting, like taking it and actually putting it on, like mixing them with the oils, or?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. So.
Because you can get beautiful colours from them, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd grind up the pastels and using quite it all got vaguely technical at one point. just because I wanted to, you've got to make sure what you're doing obviously isn't all going to just fall off the page. But
Chris Ophelia's elephant done.
Yeah. But the oils were great. I think going back to what Barbara Hepworth was saying about, you know, the physical material used with oils, I felt I've really come into my own a bit with expressing this place, because they've just got that. texture quality to them.
Substance.
And
something
yeah.
because
Yeah, that feels fitting, if you like. Yeah.
Tim, can I just ask you, then you were saying that you sort of didn't care anymore about how it was going to be received, you just did it.
Yeah.
Do you think what you just described, do you think that came from the fact that you already were in a new space, or do you think the environment itself took you into that space?
Yeah, good question. A bit of both, I think. I think I had to. I mean, I say sort of about, oh, I'm not analysing this and that, but it was like I'm trying not to, because always you have that that part of your brain kind of trying to analyse things. So, but I did find in the environment down there, I was a lot of the time, for weeks at a time, really not analysing anything. And then sometimes that would just stop, and you kind of got to work it all out a bit. But yeah, so the just being in the, I think working outside. I think if you paint a bit, some of you, there are certain times of day I find it's good to paint, like early morning, because that analytical part of your brain isn't kind of going at things so much, so you can just, yes, this is lovely. And then by 4 o'clock in the afternoon you come back and think, I don't know about that. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. I think what was interesting for me before I did this whole project, and where I am now, is just that process of seeing, and how, you know, for all of us, if we're immersed in something, how that can change like so much over time. And I think that's partly why I paint. I think it's like endlessly interesting, because you sort of things build for you, and they sort of go deeper, and then you, I guess that, you know, that's partly why you do what you do, and hope that something's going to sort of resonate. That's what I would say. Yeah, I've got this. There's a thing linked with that about doing something justice, I guess, but also why are you doing this? Or why am I doing this particular thing? And there's a quote I really like by C.S. Lewis about the beauty that you see around you, that we have this desire, if you like, to kind of pass into it, for it to become sort of part of your being, and in that process you kind of and I get you know, that there was a big thing behind what I was doing, linked with that kind of notion of feeling rooted and engaged in life, a sort of humanness thing, feeling alive, you know, whereby nature does all this talking to you, and actually has a sort of, I guess I saw, even though Tregardock is like ruthlessly, like a ruthless environment in many ways, it still sort of spoke to me quite a sort of gentle way, that gave me quite a lot of solace, really. But I think it also there's a hopefulness which you cannot get away from if you're in nature, like, you know, for long periods of time. It sort of fills you with that, because you respond to you know, you start feeling quite poetic about things, and wanting to, you know, express things, for me, with a paintbrush in a sort of more flamboyant way. So it's sort of, which are looking down from the cliffs onto the sea, and they're just observations of the reflections of the sea, and it took me 3 years to sort of bizarrely to sort of properly engage in this as a series of paintings. But that was really what it was like. I was quite sort of caught up in something, in one particular aspect, and then completely didn't notice a whole load of other stuff because of it. And so the notion of knowing the place, well, still I feel there's whole big blind spots, you know, which are there, which will no doubt come up in time, that I'll focus on. I just wanted to mention a couple of books, because these have been quite sort of significant with, just the context of what I've been doing really. One's Daphne du Maurier's Vanishing Cornwall, which was brilliant because it's all about smugglers and the sort of crazy pub fighting and it's just all manner of, you know, she just gets Cornwall, but the legend aspect and the history and the people. So reading this while down there in our house with the wind howling, you sort of you did feel kind of right in it, you know, in this kind of cauldron. But I like so Daphne du Maurier specifically because she's like there's the sort of spirit of the place which she puts into words really effectively. And I think Mary and I would sort of listen to locals when we first arrived would come and tell us how various people had died at Tregardock, and when I was like, gosh, you know, but it was all helpful. You know, it's a dangerous place, and
How did they die?
well, just the sea would swell up because you've got the cliffs and then beach, but you can get caught out. Mainly people fishing from the rocks.
Get swept off, can't they?
Yeah, and it is dangerous. I kind of had one or two moments where I thought, respect, you know, for just play it cautious. Just seeing the sea swell in front of you sometimes, and like a sort of and rise about 5 meters from where it was, and then stay on that level. You're like, whoa, that's like
And
quite.
it can change too quite from being still to suddenly not.
Yeah,
Without much preamble, really.
yeah. Yeah, so the stories of death were kind of helpful. And then the other book is this one, which some of you might have heard of, because Nan Shepherd's been given, now she's not around, loads of promo from Robert McFarlane amongst others. But her book, The Living Mountain, is an amazing read, and I think the aspect to it which really struck me, well, a couple of aspects. One is she was devoted her whole life to, you know, study the Cairngorms. So she's an authority on the place, and that kind of comes across in a similar way to Daphne du Maurier, I think, in that she just exudes passion and knowledge and a sort of assurance about what she knows. It's like, if she reads something that, if Nan had read something about the Cairngorms that is not the case, and then she immediately kind of rebukes that person and tells them this is actually the case because I know. So I love that. I think there's something that comes across from a person who's kind of walked in that way and in quite a raw way, which I find inspiring, you know, just an inspiring backdrop. And actually and then I sort of reflected how, when I was sort of putting this talk together, just how most of the artists who are in the past who've inspired me have that kind of walking in, sort of immersing themselves in their particular subject. So Kathy Colwitz, some of you might have heard of her, if you haven't, a German artist who did loads of drawings in the Depression, early 1900s, of the poverty basically, but she was, you know, she was in the poverty, she was sitting in it, scratching around with a pencil, and her work as a result just is of being in it and feeling it. Of course, somehow in this sort of mystery of when you're doing a picture, it comes through, like just sort of by nature of being so involved in the subject. So there's other people. Degas was, you know, more well known, perhaps, similarly with a sort of a very experimental but sort of an obsessive focus on specific subjects. And then also another artist I mentioned, John Virtue, who some of you might know, who's done these huge, he's sort of renowned for his black and white, huge, great studies of London when he was artist in residence at the National Gallery, and his intensity really of expression. So I've numbered it. You'll see numbers on a lot of these artworks. He numbered his artworks. He'd have number 594. I haven't got that far yet, but I kind of I resonate with that as well, in terms of there's a sort of, within all the mayhem that I've described it, or craziness of drawing process, there's a bit of a little bit of order which just helps things in reflection to sort of slot. So it's, although the numbering is not very exciting when you're looking at the show, we're looking for something like really nice fluffy title. It's more really for my own understanding of, you know, the work as it progresses. So we can, but that was sort of something he does, and I copied him because why not?
Do you think you'll return back to that beach many times over? Do you think there's a lot more for you there, and it's about the time in that one place to really kind of the inspiration keeps coming, the more familiar you get with that particular place?
Yeah, I think it's like from previous experience there'll probably be a sort of cut off at some point. But I've written here, like my last sentence here, which I didn't say, was after 3 years in many ways I'm only just getting started, and that sort of feels where I'm at the moment with it. So I think there's quite a bit in where I take it, probably more going more abstractly, I sense, because that thing I was saying about the body and how you work in feeling, I'm quite interested in where that might go.
Are you planning to take this obviously new way of working back to Oxford and the kind of architectural stuff and kind of combine it, or are you totally, do you think, like moving away from that work completely?
No, in short, I get, so when we came back from Cornwall, over this last summer I was doing a lot of Oxford drawing, and I went back to drawing Oxford how I've always drawn it, in a kind of a light sort of pastel. Yeah, I say light, I was sort of having a light touch with it really.
Yeah.
So no, there was none of this whacking the board, and it was really nice to go back to that, just like complete extremes of environments really.
Yeah.
Both like amazing, but so yeah, I was drawing. It was nice to sort of leave all this and go back to, I guess, what felt like the right response years ago, and still sort of the way I sort of feel about it. Yeah.
So it's sort of place specific, kind of the relationship that you build with the place then comes out on the paper or on the canvas.
Yeah, I think yes and no. I mean, yes, I like the idea of it being place specific. Obviously, all this work, if you're learning loads about how materials, just on the level of how the materials work, I think I can I would come back to architecture with a different kind of attitude that I'd want to use. You know, it's like building it's like a toolbox, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think now I've widened my tools. I'd want to use them a bit, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was great. We really informative and
Cool.
really great to hear more about the kind of process behind the work and stuff. So thank you very much.
No worries.